and welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 382. And today's date is June 4th, 2014, and the title of this episode is U.S. Boosting Military Assets in Europe to Counter Russia. So what are we actually seeing here? We're seeing President Obama come out and say, listen, we're going to be giving more money to this entire region. They're asking, Hagel was out there yesterday, asking all the NATO countries to boost their spending, purchase, bring in, and establish more military assets surrounding Russia, just like they did in China. They encircled China. They have a missile shield which they're developing out in the Pacific. They have a missile shield which they are developing here in Eastern Europe. And they do believe that this missile shield will counter the nuclear launch from Russia and China when the United States does a first strike nuclear attack against them. And this is what they're planning for. They do believe that they will have the ability to counter a lot of the ballistic missiles coming out of these countries, and the missile shields will be able to bring them down. But again, a lot of these missiles are hypersonic. I don't know if the technology is there yet. The House already approved a couple billion-dollar plan to create hypersonic weapons because the United States central bankers really, they don't have them. We just don't have them at this time. And this is a huge, huge problem. Now, the United States central bankers realize that the economy is completely falling apart. I mean, they are trying to maintain and sustain this illusion every single day. They continually manipulate. They try to make it look like things are getting better. We're coming out. It's recovering. This is the start of the recovery. And do you know how many times they said this is the start of the recovery? This is the path to full employment. This is the path to the housing recovery, that we're almost there. And every single time and months after that, it dips back down, and then they pump it up again, and they make us believe we're in this recovery. And of course, they want all eyes on the stock market to keep everyone mesmerized and off of what is really going on around the world. What's really going on here is that they're losing control in the Middle East. Libya is completely falling apart. They're bringing in more military assets into Iraq, into Yemen, because they need to maintain control. They're setting up a $5 billion terrorist fund for countries to maintain control themselves, because what's happening is the United States central bankers, the empire, is spread way too thin around the world, and they know this. The European nations, they are in a huge amount of debt. People are unemployed, and the austerity is just awful. People are having a very tough time making ends meet, and this is going to continue. And like I said in yesterday's report, the warning of a 2-week, they're giving us 2 weeks, and they're saying there's some type of cyber attack happening. And I've been saying this for quite a while now. This is a way to bring this in and blame this on another country. Think about this for a second. They do a cyber attack, and they say, yes, Syria, Russia, China, attacked the financial institutions, the bank accounts. They've been siphoning off money, and now they need to close down the banks. I mean, this argument is absolutely perfect. In the terms of service of most of the banks, it says they are not responsible for what happens to your accounts during a cyber attack. The NASDAQ, the BATS, the stock exchange all have kill switches ready for the market to come down. They know they're going to plan this. They know they're going to do this because they need to blame this collapse on another country. They do not want to be blamed themselves. They need to blame it on another country because they want to reset the entire system. And this has been their plan from the start. Do they act very quickly at this? No. They take it step by step, incrementally. They make sure they have everything set up the way they want them. Some plans don't go well. Some plans go very well. Ukraine didn't go well. During the beginning of the Middle East, when they had NATO, UN, and the United States invade these countries and replace all those governments with puppet regimes, that went well. The part that didn't go well is that the people are rising up in these countries and they no longer want the United States, the private Western central bankers, in their countries. And this is what they're worried about, because once one country takes their country back and they sell their oil and other natural resources not using the US dollar, and they kick the private Western central bank out, this is going to be a major problem, because they're going to sell this not using the US dollar, and other countries are going to say, well, if you're not selling it, if you're not selling the natural resources using the US dollar, I no longer need to hold the US dollar. So what I'll do is I'll send that back to the United States and I'll use a different currency, or I'll barter in gold. And when this money comes back to the United States, it devalues the dollar, because there's too much of the dollar currency in circulation, and we see prices of products go up. And we're seeing this happen right now. Back in 2000, 55% of the central bankers and countries held the US dollar in reserve, and now that has dropped to 33%. By the end of this year, it's going to be about 20 to 25% or so. And we have to look around, because we see wherever United States is, wherever China is, that's where the United States is. That's why the United States is in Africa. They're trying to capture all those countries down there, bring them into the fold, make sure they have control of the natural resources. They're trying to do this in South America, in Venezuela, and we see this happening all over the world, because they realize they need to prop this up a little bit longer. They've been trying to get into Syria for a very, very long time, and that plan is not working out. Syria is having elections, and most likely President Assad is going to be the winner of those elections. So they are continually trying to prop up the system. The dollar is losing, it is collapsing, and more nations are losing faith. This is why the Fed had to start tapering, to show the American people that we are on a recovery path. Of course, they're using other organizations to do their stimulus program. Belgium, I think there's a private organization inside Belgium, or the ECB, purchasing the treasury bonds, but of course they're getting the free money from the Fed, so stimulus has really not stopped whatsoever. The tapering is an illusion, just like the stock market is an illusion. They're continually smacking down gold to keep it below 1,300, because that is an indicator, and once gold starts to rise, we know we're in big trouble, because when they can't control that anymore and gold starts going up 100, 150, 200, 250, this is how we know they have lost complete control and the market is coming apart. Now we have to remember, the stock market is the last indicator that things have completely fallen apart, that people have completely lost faith and the money's being pulled out. And when this comes down, just like in 1929, this is when people start to wake up, but at this time it really is too late, and this is why we're saying you need to be prepared before that time. You need to invest in physical assets. You have to protect your investment. You have to purchase food, medical supplies, because when inflation hits and things start going up rapidly, you will not be able to afford any of this. Let's get into the economic collapse news. We're going to go out to Cyprus, and we understand that Cyprus had bail-ins. They had capital controls for over a year. There are still capital controls still in effect. They still haven't removed all of them just yet. And what we're seeing, since the central bankers have come into Cyprus to help them, things really have not been getting better. The GDP contracted by 4.1% during the first quarter of 2014, and unemployment in monthly seasonal adjusted figures increased from 14.8% in March 2013 to 17.4% in March of 2014. Every single time the central banks come in and they say they are helping, they aren't. They are setting the country up to fail. They want the natural resources, they want them, and they're giving them paper and ink. They want the physical assets. This is what they're doing. We see what happened in Greece. We see Cyprus. We see France. We see Portugal, Italy. We're seeing it happen in UK. We see Germany having problems. This is not a good situation. Europe is falling apart. And of course, they're continually pushing the EU. This is why they wanted Ukraine. They wanted to put Ukraine on the EU, which eventually they're going to do. They wanted Ukraine to join NATO. It's in a strategic location, and of course that plan completely fell apart. Now here in the United States, what are we seeing? Well, we see the illusion of jobs where they're telling us that things are looking really great. Unemployment came down to 6.3%. It looks like we're in a really great recovery period right now for jobs. And then all of a sudden you get data from ADP saying it completely missed. They were expecting a 210,000 print, and they only got about 179,000. And again, they went back to April like they always do, and they revised the data downward. And they do this every single time. They tell you that, oh, look, we're in a recovery. The next month looks bad. They go back and they revise the data downward to something much, much lower. And they continually do this, but they really don't mention it that much. Now, the first quarter productivity misses, plunges most in 6 years. Now, we have to remember, the unemployment came down during this period, and of course they told it was cold weather, and this is why retail sales were doing bad. This is why real estate was doing bad. But unemployment came down, and productivity completely missed. So we're getting more jobs, but producing a lot less. I mean, this whole thing doesn't even make sense. Of course, the reason why it doesn't make sense is because they're manipulating all the numbers. They're making it fit their illusion. And this is why when you look at this, nothing makes sense. And of course, they keep making spins, excuses. And of course, like the National Association of Realtors are saying that, first they were saying the winter weather, that was the problem for real estate. Then it was there wasn't enough homes in inventory. People, couldn't choose any homes because there weren't enough. And then when the spring came, they said, well, it was the backlash from winter. We're moving into the summertime now. And they're saying, well, now there's a lot of inventory and people are confused and they don't know which homes to buy. And they just continually come up with more and more excuses, except for the real excuse, which is the economy is falling apart. People are unemployed, underemployed. They don't have the disposable income. They lost 38% of their wealth during 2008. Their credit is shot. Think of the foreclosures and the short sales. People have not recovered from this. They haven't reestablished their savings. It is not going well. They haven't reestablished their full amount of money they've been making. They're making less now. This is why we see retail failing. This is why we see real estate failing. And right now, half of Americans can't even afford their homes. Over half of Americans, 52%, have had to make at least one major sacrifice in order to cover their rent or mortgage over the last 3 years, according to the Housing Matters survey. Well, of course they have. They're sitting in their home. We've seen the number of layoffs come down since the beginning of this year, actually going back to 2013. These people get their severance, they have unemployment, and when this starts to trickle out and run out, guess what? They have to dip into their savings. They have to cut things. It makes it harder and harder to live in that home. And as things go along, it will get even worse because they will not be able to find a job, and if they do find a job, it will be for less money. And of course, when they purchase the home, guess what? It was when they had a very nice paying job, and now it's getting to be a lot worse for them. They can't make ends meet. They're struggling, and we're seeing this all around the country. Now, every single part of the country gets hit at different times. Some are doing much, much better than others, but eventually it will all spread throughout the country. There's about 43% of respondents in the Housing Matters survey say owning a home is no longer an excellent long-term investment and one of the best ways for people to build wealth and assets anymore. And over half say buying a home has become less appealing to them. And what's happening is that people are looking at the American dream and they're saying that you can't really get there. You can't reach it anymore. And they're saying that people are struggling. They're struggling to make ends meet. There's a poll out there from CNN Orc International shows 59% of adults think the American dream has become impossible for most to achieve, up from 54% in a poll conducted in 2006. What's more, 63% of those surveyed believe that most children in the U.S. will grow up to be worse off than their parents. Well, you can see what's happening. Since we came off the gold standard in 71, the dollar has been losing its value, and it's been speeding up since that time. It's been escalating. If you look at what's been happening, food prices have been soaring. And what they've been doing is they've been shrinking the product so people wouldn't notice. They've been giving you less in packages. But certain foods they can't do this with. Of course, the fresh food, it makes it very difficult for them to hide that with fresh food. And of course, now they're going to blame it on droughts and many other things. But the real problem is the dollar is continually losing value, and it's doing this every single day. Now, to bring in the revenue the government needs and to create, and I said this in another report, to create this one world like global tax. This is the framework that they set up with FATCA. Right now, 77,000 foreign banks, investment funds, and other financial institutions have agreed to share information about U.S. account holders with the IRS as part of the crackdown on offshore tax evasion. Now, this is what they're using to keep the illusion alive that, oh yeah, we got to go find those tax evaders. No, what they're looking for is money, revenue to bring into the country, because what's happening is those people are no longer working in the United States, and many of the people are underemployed, and these numbers are an illusion, 6.3%. The numbers are more close to 30 to 37% of unemployment at this time. And they realize there's no place to go, no place to look for this money inside the country. So what they need to do is they need to go find those accounts outside of the country, find those people who are working outside of the country to bring in that revenue. And this is what they're doing. Nearly 70 countries have agreed to share information from their banks as part of the U.S. law that targets Americans hiding assets overseas, including Switzerland, the Bahamas, and Cayman Islands. Starting in March of 2015, these financial institutions have agreed to supply the IRS with names, account numbers, balances for accounts controlled by U.S. taxpayers. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of U.S. taxpayers are completely taking their money out of the system or denouncing their citizenship. And we've been seeing a lot more people denouncing their citizenship at this time. Under the law, the foreign banks that don't agree to share information with the IRS face steep penalties when doing business with the U.S. And those countries that don't want to be involved, that don't cooperate, they can be hit with sanctions. And we have to remember, Obama set up Obamacare to bring in more revenue. And of course, Obamacare is completely falling apart. The website was a mess. We understand that there are taxes interwoven into Obamacare. There's penalties if you do not take it, and they are not getting the people they thought they were going to get to sign up for Obamacare. And again, the health insurance, the premiums on them are very, very high. The benefits that you get are not there. The deductibles are very high. I explained this before, but when you have a deductible of $5,000 and you're paying a $500, $600 premium every single month, you get no benefit until you reach the $5,000 mark. You have to pay out of pocket every single time you go to the doctor until you reach that $5,000 deductible. Then the insurance company kicks in, but you're continually paying the $500, $600 premium every single month. And the youth of America, of course, they can't find jobs. 80% of the college graduates are having a very difficult time finding a job, and when they do, it's a part-time job making absolutely no money, and they have their student loans to pay back. But what we're finding out, all these numbers that they were throwing around about Obamacare, 8 million people signed up, and we realized that it wasn't really 8 million because most of them didn't pay, and we're finding out that even the people that did sign up, that paid, might not be allowed to join Obamacare. This goes on to say about 1 in 4 people who signed up have discrepancies. Several congressional committees are actively investigating the discrepancies, most of which involve important details on income, citizenship, and immigration status. Now, there were some people out there saying that Obamacare, the White House administration went out and they found, people who weren't really living in the country to sign up, other people to sign up, and this is starting to fall apart now. The document provided to AP said that 2.1 million people enrolled through the new health insurance exchanges were affected by one or more inconsistency. As of the end of April, about 1.2 million have discrepancies related to income, 505,000 have issues with immigration data, and 461,000 have conflicts related to citizenship information. So we can see this whole scam is completely falling apart at this time, and there is no revenue being generated from this. But of course, don't worry. The insurance companies, they will get bailed out because there is a bailout clause for the insurance companies if they do not make the profits the government promised. And of course, who's going to bail them out? The taxpayers. Now, a couple of reports ago, I talked about this bill being pushed through Congress about removing or repealing the First Amendment, which they can't do because the only way you can do that is to get all the states together, and they have to ratify a new amendment to get rid of another amendment, and just by the Congress voting on something really doesn't mean anything. But of course, in the eyes of government, if we say it's law, it must be law, which is not true. But right now, Senator Ted Cruz, he's criticizing Democrats for attacking the First Amendment. 42 Democrats have signed their name to a constitutional amendment that would give Congress the power to muzzle Planned Parenthood and the National Right to Life. He said 42 Democrats have signed their name to giving Congress the right to muzzle the Sierra Club, to muzzle the National Rifle Association and the Brady Center on Handgun Violence, to muzzle Michael Moore, to muzzle Teamsters and the National Education Association, to muzzle the NAACP, to muzzle the Anti-Defamation League, to muzzle pastors, priests, rabbis who organize their parishioners to be involved in politics, to muzzle the alternative media, on and on and on, because they don't want to hear from any one of these people that criticize in what they're doing. But this is the whole purpose of the First Amendment, is to criticize your government, to question everything they do, to keep them in line. The corporate media is not doing it anymore. They're bought off and paid for. So it's left up to the people to come out and say, you know what? We don't agree with what you're doing. We see what you're doing. And it is not okay with the people. And they do not like this whatsoever. Okay, now we understand the United States government, central bankers, are trying to get into any country that has natural resources that will benefit them. They love countries with a huge amount of oil, gold, lithium, and many other natural resources, and they've been trying to get into Venezuela for a very long time. Right now, the Venezuelan president Maduro has alleged U.S. involvement in a plot to oust his government and assassinate him. And of course, they're trying to do the same thing in Venezuela as they did in Ukraine. They want to remove the government, the elected government down there, and place a puppet regime, just like they did in Ukraine, just like they did in all the Middle Eastern countries, just like they did in Thailand, just like they did pretty much everywhere else. This is how they work it. This is their playbook. They send in protesters. They get them all riled up. They try to remove the government that exists at this time. They're doing it with Syria. Of course, they're having a tougher time there. They're paying mercenaries to say we don't want Assad. They've been fighting for a very long time. They're trying many different tactics in Venezuela, and we have to remember Venezuela has a huge oil deposit. I believe it's much bigger than Saudi Arabia, and they would love to get a private Western central bank in Venezuela and put that oil on the dollar to prop it up even longer. And this is what they're trying to do. This is their agenda, to prop up the system as long as they possibly can and then eventually get the war started. But it's getting more and more difficult as time goes on because people are catching, I shouldn't say people, I should say countries and people are catching on to what they're doing. They see it now. The internet has helped, and it has helped with alternative media showing them that look, there's a problem here. We caught this, this conversation, and it says that you paid $5 billion for a coup d'etat. We have pictures showing Blackwater in there. We have pictures showing paid mercenaries from Syria being transferred into Ukraine. We see what is going on. We don't have to listen to the corporate media anymore. That doesn't really much tell us anything. All they tell us is everything is rosy and great until everything falls apart. Now, Brazil, they are building a nuclear submarine to patrol offshore oil. They're building 5 submarines to patrol its massive coast, including one powered by an atomic reactor that would put it in the small club of countries with nuclear subs. The South American giant is in the process of exploring major oil fields off its shores that could make it one of the world's top petroleum exports. And guess what? The United States central bankers would love to get into Brazil and just tap that oil and put the U.S. dollar on as the reserve currency to pay for all that oil. Now, the GCHQ operates secret Middle East spy hub in Oman. The location of a secret British spy base is Oman. They are tapping undersea cables in the Middle East, and it has up until now remained unpublished because of the pressure from the government. British intelligence agency Government Communication Headquarters has 3 above top secret spy bases located in Oman, where it taps into various undersea cables passing through the Strait of Hormuz into the Persian-Arabian Gulf. The GCHQ spends tens of millions of pounds annually to employ 2 telecom companies, BT codename Remedy and Vodafone Cable codename Geronic, to run secret teams which install hidden connections which copy customers' data and messages to the spooks, processing centers, and install optical fiber taps or probes into equipment belonging to other companies without their knowledge or consent. So we can see it's just not the United States. All the private Western Central Bank countries, they are all spying. They have all their hubs, all their areas, and they are spying on every single person because they are very nervous about what people are actually doing. Now, we understand President Obama was out there telling us that, we're going to be removing troops from Afghanistan, and what we're seeing right now is NATO is going to keep around 12 to 14,000 troops in there. Of course, the United States is going to keep around 10,000. And of course, we're going to see this number jump up eventually. They're also going to be replaced by paid mercenaries or contractors as time goes on. But they're going to keep about 1,800 Americans in Afghanistan, and they will be in a special counterterrorism mission. Basically, what they're going to do is they're going to guard the poppies, because that is what is used to create opium, which they use for covert operations. They're going to make sure that China is not pushing forward and helping Afghan even further, because you have to remember China is in Afghanistan. They just found lithium, a huge amount of copper. Afghanistan is already pushing oil out to the public now. They have their own refinery, and United States, NATO, they are never going to leave Afghanistan. They will never leave those natural resources and let China handle it. Just like in Africa, China is in all these countries, Nigeria, Mali, Sudan, Kenya, and of course the United States is there because they have to keep China in check, because China yuan renminbi is a direct threat to the dollar at this time. Now, out in the Ukraine, Russia has extended the prepayment for another day. It was set for June 9th, and now they're saying June 10th is when Ukraine will have to pay up. And the reason they're doing this is because June 9th is a public holiday in Ukraine. Now, Ukraine is ready to sign The EU trade deal. Ukraine's President-elect Petro Poroshenko is ready to sign a deal establishing free trade between the EU and Ukraine right after his inauguration on June 7th. The agreement lies at the heart of Ukraine crisis, and he hopes it will restore peace. Well, it will not restore peace because you are still using the anti-terrorism forces in Donetsk, Kharkov, and Slavyansk, and you are continually killing civilians, and you want them to give, and you want them to say, okay, we'll be part of Ukraine, and so far this has not happened. So there will be no peace. Actually, the mission has been intensified. We're seeing missiles being dropped on people, bombs being dropped on people, and they're continually moving their agenda forward. By Kiev signing the political part of the trade agreement, which will break down barriers between Ukraine's $145 billion economy and Europe's nearly $17 trillion economy. And ever since Kiev decided to go with the EU, prices have gone up, inflation is running rampant, the hypervenia is losing value at this time, and energy costs are going up. People are finding it very hard to function in this country, and it really looks like Greece and Cyprus and France and Italy and all the other European nations. And of course, this is what happens when you join the EU. Right now, Lithuania said yes, they're going to be joining the EU come 2015. And of course, I don't know if they really looked around of what's happening, but they're going to be put into debt, and it's going to be a very difficult time for that country coming onto the system. Now, we understand that the United States central bankers, they are pledging to bring in military assets into Kiev, into Ukraine. They're also giving aid into Ukraine, and the U.S. has pledged additional military help to Ukraine, as well as potential training of its law enforcement and military personnel. And you see this happening in the Middle East, where after they capture a country, they have the coups, and they replace the government with a puppet regime. They bring in the military advisors, the personnel, to help train the forces there and tell them what to do. It's the same MO. It has not changed at all. Since March, the White House has approved more than $23 million in security assistance to Ukraine. Now the U.S. is providing additional $5 million aid for the provision of body armor, night vision goggles, and additional communications equipment. Now, we understand that in Ukraine, Poroshenko, he's out there and he's saying, you know, I'm going to get Crimea back. And now we have the NATO chief, Rasmussen. He is out there saying that the alliance still considers Crimea a territory of Ukraine and urge Russia to give that territory back. All NATO allies made clear that we condemn the illegal and illegitimate annexation of Crimea and that the allies will not recognize it. Well, I hate to tell you, but there was a referendum in Crimea. International bodies were there to oversee it. It was very peaceful. The people came out and they voted and said, we will not be a part of this anymore. We are separating ourselves from the puppet regime in Ukraine, and they joined Russia. So they can complain and talk all they want. Crimea is no longer part of Ukraine. Now, we do have quite a few ships in the Black Sea at this time. We have a French stealth frigate is reportedly conducting electronic surveillance of Russian coastal infrastructure in the Black Sea. The French stealth frigate, which passed Turkey's Bosphorus Strait and entered the Black Sea on May 28th, is conducting a signet operation in immediate proximity to the Russians' Black Sea Fleet installation in the Crimea Peninsula. The latest information suggests that there are 2 NATO vessels deployed in the Black Sea now, the Surkov and the U.S. Navy USS Vela Gulf, which entered the Black Sea on May 23rd. And you have to remember, under the Montreux Convention, if you are a non-state Black Sea country, you can only be in there for 21 days. So these ships will have to leave very, very soon. Another NATO reconnaissance ship, Italy's Elettra, is preparing to enter the Black Sea on June 15th and head close to the Russian shores. So there are a lot of ships in the Black Sea monitoring what Russia is doing. And so far, they have seen absolutely nothing because Russia is doing absolutely nothing. Who is doing all of this? The United States, central bankers, EU, controlling the puppet regime and coming down hard on the people in the southeast region and just killing them willy-nilly. It doesn't matter. They do this in the Middle East with drone attacks. They kill people in weddings. They kill people in apartment buildings. They do not care because they believe these people are below them. They don't care about the people once they have control of the country, and we see this happen time and time again. Now, the Pentagon right now is beefing up the military assets in Eastern Europe. There are going to be three B-52 nuclear-capable bombers headed to Europe on Tuesday to partake in training with the allied nations. The deployment would serve to familiarize Air Force crews with air bases operations in the region, according to the USS Strategic Command. Also on Tuesday, a U.S. Navy guided missile destroyer left the shores of Virginia to make its way across the Atlantic to a naval base in Rota, Spain. The USS Rosas, equipped with Aegis radar system, which enables the tracking and interception of enemy ballistic missiles. The ship is the second to be permanently home ported in Rota under a three-stage Obama administration plan for beefing up missile defense systems in Europe. 2 more vessels are slated to follow by the end of the year, bringing the entire contingent to 4. So we can see what's happening. They're moving all the military assets from the United States and making sure they're strategically positioning these ships, the B-52 bombers, all around surrounding Russia at this time. And this is exactly what they're doing. They did the same thing with the pivot to Asia. They are doing the same thing now in Russia. This is preparing for something big, and that big thing is World War III. Like we said, the entire system, the private Western central bank system, is falling apart, and they know it. And incrementally, every single day, you see them continually building this up. Now, in Yemen, we understand the people are rising up. They're sick and tired of the private Western central banks. And right now, the Yemen government, which is controlled by the United States central bankers, decided to use warplanes and bomb the city of Amran. And ever since that happened, they've killed many Yemen people in that area, and now tens of thousands of protests against Yemeni army attack. They are taking to the streets and saying, enough is enough. You're killing innocent people. And of course, the Yemen people want their country back, just like Libya, just like Iraq, just like Lebanon. It's the same in every single place. Once the United States goes in, replaces the government with a puppet regime, the people eventually will say, we had enough, we want the country back, or we don't want to be part of it, like in Ukraine, and they start fighting back. They fight for their freedom, they fight for democracy, they fight for themselves to have control of their own lives. Now, we understand in Iraq that Apache helicopters are being delivered there. We also understand that military advisors are being sent to Iraq to help train the armed forces. We are now seeing the U.S. is going to deliver 36 F-16 fighter jets to Iraq. The U.S. earlier in March provided Iraq with some 100 Hellfire missiles, as well as assault rifles and other ammunition. April, the U.S. sent more arms, providing Iraq with 11 million rounds of ammunition and other supplies. John Kerry said that the U.S. would support fighting al-Qaeda-linked groups in Iraq, but not with the U.S. troops at this time. Of course, they call them military advisors, and this is how it pretty much starts. They say military advisors, and then all of a sudden military advisors are being fired upon. United States government says you have permission to fire back, and this is how the troops actually end up in Iraq. In Iraq, it's getting worse and worse there, and this is why they're bringing in a lot of military assets to maintain control. Libya is completely falling apart. The militants in Libya have striked and bombed the Libyan government right now, the acting government, the puppet regime, I should say. and they just want their country back, and it looks like they might be doing it. And this is when the United States will say, you know what? We gave the Libyan government 2 months, and now we're coming in. Enough is enough. We will take control, along with NATO, the UN, and this is why the assault ship Bataan is sitting outside Libya with 1,000 Marines at this time in the Mediterranean. Now, during the Syrian elections, it looks like Washington pressured several countries to prevent Syrian expats from voting. They tried to block them. Of course they did. They didn't want them to vote for Assad. They knew Assad was going to win because their whole entire theme of why the opposition, the paid mercenaries, are there has been made up. That's how they know. And right now, Assad has won the Syrian presidential elections with 88.7% of the vote at this time. Now, the United States is continually pushing this idea that Assad has hidden chemical weapons and biological weapons in the country. And right now they went to the UN. The UN is investigating it, along with the United States and France and England, and they're all sitting there saying that Syria needs to prove that they're not hiding chemical weapons, which is absolutely ridiculous. You have to prove that you're not hiding it. No, the proof is on them. You have to prove that he is hiding it. So right now, inspectors overseeing the destruction of Syria's chemical weapons arsenal have asked Assad's government to clarify disparities in its original declaration on the cache of toxic gas. Assad's government has indicated it wants the UN OPCW mission shut down as soon as all chemicals are shipped out of Syria. And of course, there's still 7 to 8% left there. They can't transfer it out because because of the paid mercenary, because the United States central bankers are keeping that and trying to maintain a battlefield where they cannot remove these chemical weapons at this time. Western officials want the mission to continue to investigate numerous ambiguities in Syria's chemical weapons declaration, which have become increasingly glaring in the course of the mission's work. The officials have cited U.S., French, British intelligence that Assad government had failed to disclose all of its poison gas stocks in its original declaration, leaving it with the capability to produce and deploy chemical arms. And of course, this will null and void the treaty they have with Syria and Russia. And right now, what they're trying to show is that Assad has chemical weapons because he used chlorine gas, which he didn't. It was the rebels, the paid mercenaries, and this is a complete false flag, because once this treaty is null and void, this will give them the opportunity to say that he didn't abide by it, and they would have the ability to go in and say, you know what, we need to go into Syria now and remove Assad, even though his people voted for him, and this is a sovereign nation, and they're going to play dirty, and they're going to try anything they possibly can to get into Syria. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks.